Welcome back to our channel, your trusted source for the most in HG&J, depth, and honest analysis of the entertainment industry's most shocking lawsuits. Today, we invite you to witness a dramatic new chapter in the historic 31st trial of Sean Diddy Combs. What initially appeared to be another routine hearing featuring familiar witnesses from Diddy's circle took an unexpected turn when the name, Janice Combs, Diddy's 83-year-old mother, echoed throughout the courtroom, marking a stunning turning point in the case. A heavy atmosphere hung over the courtroom. The rustle of papers, the flash of camera shutters, and the scattered whispers all came to a halt as the judge struck the gavel to resume the day's testimony. Suddenly, the courtroom assistant stood and declared, "The prosecution calls Mrs. Janice Combs, mother of Sean Diddy Combs, to the stand." The entire room fell into breathless silence. At that moment, the courtroom lights seemed to dim. Sean Diddy Combs, who had maintained his composure for days, now looked visibly tense, his posture stiff. His legal team exchanged anxious glances. Across the room, the prosecutors sat upright, a flicker of anticipation in their eyes. This could be the fatal blow. Janice Combs entered the courtroom, petite but with sharp, resolute eyes. Her silver hair was neatly tied, and she wore a formal jacket. Every step she took radiated unshakable determination. No one said a word. Hearts beat in unison as she took her seat, was sworn in, and paused for a few suspenseful seconds. Diddy, seated directly across from her, couldn't bring himself to look at her. His face had gone pale, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the table. For so long, he had seemed untouchable, and now, the one woman he trusted more than anyone was about to speak the truth about him. The prosecutor spoke up, their voice calm but piercing. "Mrs. Combs, you've shared many things with your son over the years. Sometimes, it's been said that you..." She folded her hands and looked down at the floor. "I know my son," she said, her voice warm but unwavering. "I've seen changes in him for a long time." Each word sank deep into the room. Reporters bent over their notebooks, the lawyers remained still, even the judge didn't move. "I know I love my son, but sometimes, the things I heard in his phone calls, I knew he had." Her voice began to tremble. Just a few words, but enough to send a shockwave through the courtroom. From the back, there was a soft gasp. A staff member closed their eyes. Diddy shut his tightly, his body trembling. Moments later, the camera shutters resumed their frantic clicking, trying to capture the emotional storm sweeping the courtroom. No one could look away. Every answer from Janice wasn't directed at a celebrity, but at her son, and it was painfully clear she had chosen truth over loyalty. In that razor-sharp moment, there was no spotlight, no fame, only a mother's heartbreaking reckoning with what her son had become. And everyone in that courtroom knew something unspoken was being revealed behind those hollow stares. This was Diddy's reckoning, and the history of this trial would never be the same again. No one expected that what Janice Combs, the mother of Sean Diddy Combs, was about to say would be outside every media narrative, beyond speculation from former staff or business associates. This was the voice of the woman who raised him, who stood by him through decades of triumph and scandal, now stepping forward to speak the truth. Diddy's lead attorney immediately stood up, objecting that family communications were privileged and that her testimony would unfairly prejudice the jury. But the prosecution fired back. There is no legal privilege protecting communications between a mother and her adult son, especially when those communications involve alleged criminal conduct. After a tense sidebar, the judge struck the gavel, objection overruled. The entire courtroom went still. Every breath seemed suspended. Reporters froze mid-keystroke, fingers hovering. The courtroom sketch artists paused with pencils in the air. Diddy's family members sat shocked, their faces a mixture of confusion and disbelief. The prosecution maintained unreadable expressions. Janice Combs calmly adjusted her glasses and looked the prosecutor in the eye. "I've been asked to testify about conversations I've had with my son over the years, and about behaviors I've witnessed that concern me. I'm here because I believe the truth needs to be told, no matter how painful it is. A ripple of tension swept across the courtroom. Diddy's attorney prepared to object again, but this time, Diddy himself tugged at his sleeve and pulled him down. He knew. He was ready to hear it. The prosecutor approached gently, mindful of the witness's age and emotional weight. Mrs. Combs, could you please describe your relationship with your son? Janice inhaled slowly. Her voice, though aged, was unwavering. I raised Sean as a single mother after his father was murdered when he was just a boy. I worked multiple jobs to support him, to give him opportunities one never had. And he did it. He exceeded every dream I had for him. Her expression softened as she recalled his early days. Sean was always charismatic. Even as a child, he could convince anyone of anything. He had that gift. A fleeting smile touched her lips, then vanished. But somewhere along the way, something changed. She turned slightly toward the jury, voice dropping. Success came so quickly, so overwhelmingly. Suddenly, everyone was saying yes to him. Everyone wanted something from him. And I began to see my son believe that he was above the rules. The prosecutor gently guided her through memories from the early 2000s, when Diddy was at his peak. Janice recounted the growing unease, his tightening grip on everyone around him, his rage when challenged, his disregard for personal boundaries. At first, I told myself it was the pressure. The entertainment world is cruel. He was carrying so much. But then, I started hearing things. Seeing things. During visits to his homes. Her voice grew quieter. There were young women who looked dazed. Staff who seemed afraid of him. Rooms I wasn't allowed to enter. She paused, then recalled one moment vividly. In 2008, I showed up unannounced at his Miami residence. Mothers can do that, she added, drawing a few nervous chuckles from the gallery. But the humor didn't linger. Everyone in that courtroom felt it. This wasn't about fame anymore. It was a mother facing the terrifying truth about her son. And the words she was about to say next might rewrite the entire course of this historic trial. No one in the courtroom was prepared for this. But as Janice Combs began to reveal what had never been said before, every eye was fixed on her, and not a single sound dared to break the tension. There had been a party the night before, she began, her voice low. When I walked in the next morning, the staff were cleaning, but it wasn't the usual post-party mess. They were quietly collecting phones from different rooms. One young woman was crying while a security guard escorted her out. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A few reporters froze mid-sentence. Jurors glanced at each other, visibly shaken. The tension was suffocating. Sean, he was furious that I came unannounced. He shouted, "You should have called first, Mom." Her eyes glistened as she recalled the moment. The prosecutor held up a photograph. "Do you recognize this location?" She adjusted her glasses, examined it closely, and nodded. "This is the pool house at his Los Angeles home. Around 2010, he converted it into what he called a studio, but he was secretive about it. I was never allowed in. That was strange. I'd always been welcome everywhere before." Over the years, her concerns grew. I asked questions. Mothers do that too. But he'd brush her off. He told her she didn't understand the industry. That everything was consensual. That it was just how the music world worked. When asked if her son ever talked to her about the allegations made by women, Janice slowly nodded. When the first accusations came out in 2017, I called him immediately. I asked him directly, was any of it true? He said they were lying, they wanted money, that this happened to every successful man in the industry. She paused, her hand gripping the witness stand. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. He was my son. And what changed your belief? The prosecutor asked gently. late 2023, after Cassie filed her lawsuit. I confronted him. Just the two of us, in his New York apartment. I told him I didn't want the media version or the lawyer version. I wanted the truth from mother to son. The room fell into absolute silence. Even the court officer paused mid-step. He looked tired. Something in him cracked. He didn't confess everything. But he said one thing I'll never forget. Mom, you don't build what I've built by playing by everyone else's rules. Sometimes people get hurt. That's business. Her voice cracked for the first time. That's not how I raised him. That's not business. That's wrong. Diddy remained motionless, eyes glued to the table. His lawyers whispered frantically, scribbling notes, but he seemed unreachable, lost in the sound of his mother's words. Janice went on, describing her devastation when the surveillance footage of Diddy assaulting Cassie was released in early 2024. I called him right after I saw the video. I was shattered. I asked how he could do that. He said it was a difficult time in their relationship, that I was seeing one moment out of context. That he wasn't that person anymore. Did you believe him? No, she replied softly. Not anymore. Because I had seen flashes of that rage before. Not directed at me, but at staff, at business partners. The man in that video, he wasn't a stranger to me. And that realization, it broke my heart. As her testimony deepened, she spoke of finding unsettling notes in his office during a 2024 visit, lists of women's names. Some marked handled, others labeled potential problem. When she confronted him, he simply took the paper from her hand. He said it was just business, nothing I needed to worry about. But the look in his eyes. I knew. As a mother, you know when your child is hiding something, even when they're grown. The prosecutor handed her another document. Mrs. Combs, this has been marked Government Exhibit 42. Do you recognize it? She looked down and nodded slowly. Yes. These are my notes. I started keeping them after that conversation. Everything I'd seen. Everything we'd talked about. Behaviors that scared me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. And why did you start writing these notes? Because I was afraid I was losing perspective. That my love for him was clouding my judgment. Writing it down helped me see the pattern. And what I saw terrified me. At that exact moment, Diddy finally looked up, locking eyes with his mother for the first time since she had taken the stand. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but the weight of it felt like a lifetime down a silent, electric exchange. A mother. A son. And a truth that could no longer be denied. In that moment, no one in the courtroom dared to move. The tension was thick, almost tangible. And then, Janice Combs, eyes steady, voice resolute, turned to face the prosecutor. I love my son. That will never change. But I can't pretend anymore. I can't stay silent anymore. Too many people have been hurt. Every eye was on her. Even Diddy's defense attorneys had stopped writing. The journalists leaned forward, their fingers frozen above keyboards, hanging on every word. The prosecutor stepped forward gently, showing deep respect for the emotional gravity of the moment. Mrs. Combs, I want to ask you about a specific conversation you had with your son this past April, after his arrest, but before this trial began. Can you tell the court what happened during that visit? Janice straightened her back as if bracing herself for the hardest truth she would speak. Yes. I visited Sean at the detention center. They made special arrangements, because of who he is. We met in a private room. Just the two of us. She took a deep breath. I told him I needed the truth. All of it. Before I could continue defending him publicly. I said, Sean, I'm your mother. I love you unconditionally. But I need to know what I'm standing behind. The courtroom froze. Not even a cough dared break the silence. He was quiet for a long time, she continued. Then he said, "The truth? The truth is, I created a world where I made the rules. Where what I wanted happened. Where people either played along or got pushed aside. Was it always right? No. Did people get hurt? Yes. But that's how power works, Ma. That's how it's always worked." A wave of unease passed through the jury box. The prosecutor's tone remained calm but focused. "Did you ask him about the specific allegations? The parties, the recordings, the drugs, the threats?" "I asked everything. I needed to hear him deny it, if it wasn't true." She paused, and then, but he didn't deny it. He said, "It's complicated. Everything was consensual at the beginning. Nobody was forced. But once you're in that world, the lines blur. Sometimes people change their minds later. But by then, they'd taken the money. They'd benefited." Janice's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the witness stand. "I told him," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "that consent obtained through pressure, through fear, through intoxication, isn't real consent. He just looked at me and said, 'That's not how it works in my world.'" At the defense table, Diddy's attorneys looked increasingly rattled. His lead counsel scribbled a note and pushed it toward him, but Diddy didn't react. He didn't even glance. His eyes were locked on his mother. "Did your son ever explicitly admit to the criminal conduct he's charged with?" the prosecutor asked. "Not in those exact words," Janice replied. "But he told me enough for me to understand. He said, 'The system I built worked for years. Everyone got what they wanted. It only became a problem when people decided to change the rules.'" She turned to the jury. "I raised my son to take responsibility for his actions. To be accountable. But in that moment, I saw that he no longer saw people as people, just as pieces in a game he thought he controlled." The prosecutor introduced a new exhibit, a handwritten letter Janice had sent to her son after that conversation. In it, she expressed her love, but also her deep disappointment and refusal to defend behavior she now recognized as harmful and wrong. "Did you receive a response to that letter?" "Yes," she said. Sean called. He was angry at first. Then almost desperate. He told me I didn't understand what was at stake, that everything he built was on the line. She looked down, her voice tightening. And I told him, that's exactly why I had to speak the truth. Because it wasn't just his life at stake, it was the lives of the people he'd hurt. "So what brought you here today, Mrs. Combs? Why did you decide to testify?" Janice inhaled deeply, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Because the truth matters. Because accountability matters. Because I raised my son to be better than this. And because real love, a mother's love, means wanting your child to face consequences, not shielding them from it and watching them get worse." She turned to look at her son again. This time, the silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken pain and a mother's final plea for redemption. "I'm here," she said, "because I love my son enough to tell the truth about him, even when it hurts. Because the women who were hurt deserve someone to acknowledge their pain. And because Sean needs to understand, no amount of money, fame, or power puts you above basic human decency." And something in Diddy broke. His shoulders sagged. His practiced expression of control collapsed. For the first time since the trial began, he didn't look like a music mogul. He looked like a son, crushed beneath the weight of his mother's disappointment. The prosecutor thanked Mrs. Combs and sat down. The defense attorney rose, his tone unexpectedly gentle. He didn't attack her credibility. Didn't accuse her of having an agenda. He simply tried to establish that she hadn't directly witnessed any crimes, that her testimony was based on conversations, impressions, and moral conviction. Throughout it all, Janice remained composed. She acknowledged what she hadn't seen firsthand, but never backed down from what she had come to understand, that her son had built and maintained a system that harmed people. And in private, he had essentially admitted it. As she was excused from the stand, she paused, looked at her son one final time. No words were spoken. But in that gaze was a lifetime of love, disappointment, and, impossibly, hope. Then she walked slowly past the defense table, her back straight, her dignity intact. Diddy watched her leave. And something in his face, raw, exposed, suggested that of all the testimony the jury had heard, his mother's words had struck the deepest blow. The mask was gone. Only the truth remained between a mother and her son. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe and comment to follow the next developments. Thank you and see you again.